So we were talking about slopes and positive and negative. So if you remember, a line that is moving upwards as you go from left to right, we know the slope is positive. And a line that is moving downwards from left to right, we know that has a slope that is negative. Okay, it's decreasing, its slope is negative. That one is an increasing line going from left to right, so its slope is positive. Okay, now we need to know about other factors that affect the slope or that relate slopes between lines. What if you have two lines that are parallel? What can we say about two lines that are parallel? For example, that line and that line. That's the symbol for telling you that the lines are parallel. If we were in class, I'd be waiting for an answer, but unfortunately I'm not going to get one today, so I'm going to tell you the two lines that are parallel have the same slope. Now that's an important point in maths, because if you're told the slope of this line is 5, and you are told that these lines are parallel, you are being given the extra piece of information that might be very useful for you, and that extra piece of information is that the slope of this line is 5. Because if you're told the lines are parallel, you can immediately use the slope. So to bear that in mind, two lines being parallel means that the lines have the same slope. So you can use the slope of one for the other one. Another important point is if two lines are perpendicular. Okay, so let's just talk about what perpendicular is, in case you've forgotten. So two lines that are perpendicular are lines that are at right angles to each other. So if you have a look here, here is a line, okay? Now, a line that is perpendicular, well actually let me draw that over here. There's a line. A perpendicular line is a line that is at right angles. Now there are loads, there are loads of perpendicular lines that you can draw that are perpendicular to that one line. So every line has an infinite number of lines that are perpendicular, okay? So if the slope of that line is m1, is there anything that we can say about the slope of a line that is perpendicular to it? Okay, so I'm going to try this, hopefully this will work here. So if you look at this line here, this is its rise divided by its run, or its height divided by its width. Now, if we take a line that is perpendicular to it, so there's a line that is perpendicular, so we'll call this M1, which is h divided by w. The slope of this line is its rise divided by its run. Now, hopefully, if you swung this line through 90 degrees, if we swung it through 90 degrees, okay, we would find that our w would move to here, this w would move to here, and this h, if everything got moved by 90 degrees, your h would now be, your h would now move to here. Okay, so what I'm trying to get you to do there is to imagine rotating this line this way. So your h would rotate to here, and your w would rotate to here. So it's like it would map on. That's the perpendicular line. Let's look at what the slope of the perpendicular line is. So we'll call it m perpendicular. Actually, the symbol for perpendicular is that. So the slope of the line that's perpendicular to this one is its height divided by its rise divided by its run. But its rise happens to be w, and its run happens to be h. So if two lines are perpendicular, there's another point actually, sorry, before I say that. This line here is going downwards as you go from negative to positive. So it also has a negative slope, because as you go from left to right, it is going downwards. Okay? So it has a minus slope. So there are two things that you should note between the two lines. First of all, the rise divided by the run for the first slope is the rise has now turned into the run, and the run has turned into the rise for the line that's perpendicular. Because when you shift it this way, what was the rise has now become the run, and what was the run has now become the rise. Okay, so what's happened is the slope has turned upside down. The actual value, the fraction, is now the reciprocal of what it was, and the sign has changed. So the sign is opposite. Okay, so the lesson from that is, if two lines are perpendicular, then if the slope of one line is if the slope of one line is p divided by q, the slope of the other line will be q divided by p, and it'll be a minus. Or another way of thinking about it, if the slope of one line is minus p over q, then the slope of the other line will be q over p, but it is of the opposite sign, so that one's going to be a plus. So to get the slope of a perpendicular line, when you know the slope of a line, you get the reciprocal of the slope, that means turn it upside down, you get the reciprocal of the original slope, and you change its sign. So if it was positive, you make it negative. If it was negative, you make it positive. An example, if the slope of a line is 4 over 3, then the slope of a line perpendicular will be, get the reciprocal, and because that's plus, we make that minus. If the slope of a line is 3, then the slope of the line perpendicular, well, 3 is really 3 over 1, so it's going to be 1 over 3, and again, because this was plus, this is a minus. If the slope of a line is minus 2 over 3, then the slope of the line perpendicular, again, we get the reciprocal, and we do the opposite sign. So in this case, that's a positive slope, because this was negative. Okay, and the final thing to note, if two lines are perpendicular, and if we agree that if the slope of one is h over w, then the slope of the other one is w over h, and it is minus it. What happens when you multiply the slope of one line by the slope of the line perpendicular to it? Your rules for fractions, top by top, over bottom by bottom. Okay, and now we have hw is exactly the same as wh, remember? They're just multiplied. So we can divide by wh on top and on the bottom, and we get a minus 1. So the important thing is, when two slopes are perpendicular, when you multiply the two slopes, when two lines are perpendicular, when you multiply the slopes, their slope should multiply to give you minus 1. Okay? And again, that's another very useful fact. If you're asked to show that two lines are perpendicular, you find the slopes of the two lines, you multiply the slopes together, and you get minus 1, and you can say, because their slopes multiply to give you minus 1, those lines are perpendicular. Okay, so very quickly a summary on that one again. If you're told that two lines are perpendicular, then if you know the slope of one line, the slope of the other line, the slope of the line perpendicular, is the reciprocal of the first one, and to get the reciprocal, that means you do 1 over it. Okay, so to get the reciprocal of a fraction, you do 1 over the fraction, and when you get the reciprocal of a fraction, it turns the fraction upside down. Okay, so when two lines are perpendicular, then the slope of the perpendicular line is 1 over the slope of the actual line, which is the reciprocal of it, with the sign changed. Okay, and again, just to put that into context with numbers, if m1 is 7 over 8, then the slope of the line perpendicular is the reciprocal of that, which is 8 over 7. So just very quickly, the reciprocal, if you do 1, the reciprocal means 1 divided by, but 1 divided by 7 over 8 is the same, using your rules for fractions, 1 multiplied by 8 over 7. So it's 8 over 7. So when you get the reciprocal of a fraction, you are really flipping the fraction upside down. So The slope of the line perpendicular is the reciprocal of the fraction with its sign changed. And again, another point to note, if you multiply a line by if you multiply the slope of one line by the slope of a line perpendicular, you will always get -1. And let's just look at it here. 7 over 8, and if you multiply that by -8 over 7, you get top by top -56, bottom by bottom +56, which is -1. Okay?